Hello everyone. Welcome to our YouTube channel, The World Times News by AI. So let's start the video. New evidence found by BBC News casts further doubt on the Greek coastguard's version of events surrounding last month's deadly migrant boat sinking, in which up to 600 people died. Two survivors have described how the coastguard pressed them to identify 9 Egyptians on board as traffickers. A new video of the overcrowded boat foundering at sea also challenges the Greek coastguard's account. It was taken when the boat was said to be on a steady course. BBC Verify has confirmed the footage was filmed when the coastguard claimed the boat was not in need of rescue, and was in fact filmed by the coastguard itself. We have also confirmed that the larger vessel in the background is the oil tanker Faithful Warrior, which had been asked to give supplies to the migrant boat. The official Greek Coast Guard account had already been challenged in a BBC Verify report, but now we have seen court documents which show serious discrepancies between survivors' witness statements taken by the Coast Guards, and the in-person evidence later presented to a judge. A translator has also come forward with his account of a people smuggling investigation last year, after another group of migrants were rescued by the Coast Guard. He describes how witnesses from that incident were intimidated by the Coast Guard. The legal case collapsed before it could reach trial. The revelations raise fresh questions about how the Greek authorities handle such disasters. Both the Greek Coast Guard and Greek government did not comment and declined our requests for interview. Survivors, silenced and intimidated. Soon after the 14th of June sinking, 9 Egyptian men were detained and charged with manslaughter and people smuggling. But 2 survivors of the disaster say migrants were silenced and intimidated by Greek authorities, after suggesting the Coast Guards may have been to blame for the tragedy. For the past month, allegations have been made that the Coast Guard used a rope to tow the fishing vessel, causing it to sink. The 2 survivors we spoke to in Athens, who we are calling Ahmad and Musab to protect their identities, say that is what happened. They attached a rope from the left. Everyone moved to the right side of our boat to balance it, says Musab. The Greek vessel moved off quickly, causing our boat to flip. They kept dragging it for quite a distance. The men described how they spent 2 hours in the water before being picked up by the Coast Guard. When I ask how they knew it was that amount of time, Musab says his watch was still working so he could tell. Once on land, in Kalamata, they claim the Coast Guard told survivors to shut up when they started to talk about how the Greek authorities had caused the disaster. When people replied by saying the Greek Coast Guard was the cause, the official in charge of the questioning asked the interpreter to tell the interviewee to stop talking, says Ahmad. Ahmad says those rescued were told to be grateful they hadn't died. He says there were shouts of, "You have survived death. Stop talking about the incident. Don't ask more questions about it." An undated photo provided by the Greek Coast Guard shows migrants on board the crowded fishing vessel, the 14th of June 2023. The men say they are scared to speak out publicly because they fear they too will be accused like the Egyptians. "If there was a fair system in place, we would contribute to this case," says Ahmad. The men told us they had both paid $4,500, £3,480, for a spot on the boat. Ahmad's younger brother was also on board. He is still missing. Collapsing court cases. As well as this testimony given to us by survivors, we have seen court documents which raise questions about the way evidence is being gathered to be presented in court. In initial statements from 5 survivors, none mentioned the Coast Guard trying to tow the migrant vessel with a rope. But days later, in front of a judge, all explained that there had been a failed attempt to tow it. One initial statement reads, "A Coast Guard ship came to help and suddenly the ship capsized and we were in the water. Then they rescued us with an inflatable boat." Survivor. Taken from interview with Greek Coast Guard. 2. The Greek ship tied a rope to the front of our ship and began to pull us slowly, but the rope broke. The second time they tied it up, at first we felt like we were being pulled, then our ship keeled over. The Greek ship developed speed and we shouted in English. Survivor. Evidence provided to investigating judge. BBC Verify has not spoken to these witnesses and so we can't say why their accounts changed. The Greek Coast Guard initially denied using a rope, but later backtracked, admitting one had been used. But it said it was only to try to board the vessel and assess the situation. It said this was at least 2 hours before the fishing vessel capsized. 82 people are confirmed dead in the sinking, but the United Nations estimates as many as 500 more lost their lives. The Greek authorities say the charged Egyptian men are part of a smuggling ring and were identified by fellow passengers. They face up to life imprisonment if found guilty. Some survivors allege some of the 9 suspects mistreated those on board, while other testimony says some were actually trying to help. But Ahmad and Musab told us the Coast Guard had instructed all of the survivors to say that the 9 Egyptian men were to blame for trafficking them. They were imprisoned and were wrongly accused by the Greek authorities as an attempt to cover their crime, says Musab. A Greek Supreme Criminal Court deputy prosecutor is carrying out an investigation, but calls, including from the UN, for an international, independent inquiry have so far been ignored. The European Commission has indicated it has faith in the Greek investigation. But Ahmad and Musab are not alone in their concerns about the Greek Coast Guard. Interpreter comes forward to BBC. When the 9 Egyptian men were arrested in the hours after the shipwreck, it was widely reported as an example of efficient detective work by the Greek authorities. But for Farzan Kavand it rang alarm bells. He feared history was repeating itself. He says he witnessed Greek Coast Guards put 2 innocent Iranian men in the frame for people smuggling last year, following the rescue of 32 migrants whose boat had got into trouble crossing from Turkey. Mr. Kavand, a UK citizen who speaks Farsi and has lived in the Kalamata area for 20 years, acted as a translator during the Coast Guard's investigation into what happened then. He says the migrants, 28 from Afghanistan and 4 from Iran, explained that they had set off from Turkey and been at sea for 8 days before being rescued. During this time, the Greek Coast Guard had approached the boat. Before leaving, he was told. 2 Arabic-speaking men had abandoned the boat after the engine blew up, Mr. Kavand was told by the Afghan migrants. They said that most people on board had taken turns to try to steer the stricken boat to safety, including the 2 accused Iranians, who had paid to be on board like everyone else. They, the Iranian men, were highly traumatized, Mr. Kavand said. They were repeating to me that they'd never even seen an ocean before they set off in Turkey. And they kept being told they were the captain and they said, "We know nothing about the boat. We can't even swim." One of the 2 accused, a man called Saeed who was facing a long prison sentence, had been rescued with his young son, explained Mr. Kavand. I asked him, "Why did you take a 6-year-old child on a boat?" And he said the smugglers told us it's only 2 hours journey. Mr. Kavand relayed their accounts to the Coast Guard, exactly as it had been told to him, but he says when he saw the transcripts, the Afghans' testimony had changed. He fears they altered their stories after pressure from the Greek authorities. He says the Iranians told him that some of their fellow Afghan passengers had been leaned on by the Coast Guard to name them as the people smugglers, to avoid being treated unpleasantly, threatened with prison, and being returned to the Taliban. The case eventually collapsed. Mr. Kavand says he was not willing to assist the Greek Coast Guard again. He says when Saeed and his son were released from custody, the €1,500, £1,278, that had been confiscated from them was not returned. The scene ended with me thinking I don't want to do this again because they were not trying to get to the bottom of the truth. They were trying to pick a couple of guys and accuse them of being people smugglers. All of these accusations were put to the Greek authorities by the BBC, but we have received no response. Our request for an interview with Greece's Minister of Maritime Affairs, who oversees the Coast Guard, was also rejected. Greece previously accused of human rights violations. Kalamata lawyer Chrysanthi Koni says she has seen other criminal cases brought against alleged people smugglers which have troubled her. She has been involved in more than 10 such cases, she tells us. My concerns are around the translations, the way evidence is gathered and, later on, the ability of the defendants to challenge this evidence, she said. Because of these 3 points, I don't think there are enough safeguards according to the international law, and in the end I don't believe justice is done. A new study has found that the average trial in Greece for migrants accused of people smuggling lasted just 37 minutes and the average prison sentence given was 46 years. The study, commissioned by the Greens, European Free Alliance Group in the European Parliament, looked at 81 trials involving 95 people, all of whom were tried for smuggling in 8 different areas of Greece between February 2020 and March 2023. The study claims verdicts were reached often on the testimony of a single police or coastguard officer and, in more than 3/4 of the cases, they didn't appear in court for their evidence to be cross-examined. Ahmad says he and the other survivors now want authorities to recover the shipwreck and the people that went down with it, but they have been told it's too difficult and the water is too deep. He compares this to the vast amounts of money and resources spent on searching for 5 people on the Titan submersible in the North Atlantic in June. But we were hundreds, he says. It's not just a ship. It's our friends and family. Thanks.